Last Christmas Eve, when every house on Magnolia Street glowed with warm lights and laughter, I sat in the dining room of my own home, feeling like an uninvited guest. My son-in-law, Ryan Dalton, 38, a real estate broker clawing for the last scraps of his failing career, pulled out a chair and sat across from me. His eyes were bloodshot from frustration, his voice rough as if it had been dragged across gravel. And then he said the words, "I will never forget. Pay the rent or leave." Right there, in the middle of Christmas dinner, inside the very house I paid for, and in front of my daughter Amy. Amy lowered her head, her spoon trembling in her hand. No defense, no objection, not even a whisper. I remember staring at the plate of ham in front of me, still hot, still fragrant, and yet, inside me something slammed shut like a door crushed by a storm. Ryan leaned back in his chair, almost casual, like a man announcing new office policy. "This is our house now. You're just staying here." He stretched the word, staying, like I was a forgotten item left behind after a messy move. I stood up, not crying, not shaking. I simply pushed my chair back into place, neat and straight, the way a man who spent his life as a school principal always does. Then I walked out to the porch. Outside, the cold wind whipped through the Christmas lights. They reflected on the glass door in 100 fractured lines, blinking at me like the eyes of people asking one single question. When did your own home become a place you needed permission to exist in? My name is Gordon Reeves, 66 years old, a widower, a retired high school principal, a man who spent his life teaching children how to respect others. But that night, I learned something myself. Growing older doesn't mean everyone grows up. Before I go on, I know you're listening to this somewhere. Maybe folding laundry, maybe driving home, maybe lying in the dark after a long day trying to breathe your way into sleep. So tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? And if this story already has you leaning in, hit like, leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs it and subscribe, because believe me, when the sold sign appears, you'll understand why silence can be the sharpest revenge of all. That Christmas dinner, there was no smell of cinnamon, no soft carols playing in the background, only the clatter of dishes, the cold scrape of cutlery against ceramic, and Ryan's permanent scowl across the table. The two-story house on Magnolia Street, the home my late wife Ellen and I once decorated with handmade wreaths, suddenly felt smaller. Or maybe it was the people inside it who had shrunk. I set my fork down. Ryan, without waiting, without courtesy, threw a stack of bills onto the wooden table. Papers scattered like ash bursting from a dying fireplace. Electric bill, water bill, AC repair bill. Bills for things I never used, never chose, never got asked about. I looked at Ryan. He looked at me. The way someone looks at a debt they're tired of seeing unpaid. And then the words dropped colder than the December wind outside, "Pay the rent or leave." A 66-year-old man, told to pay rent in the very house he bought. The house with his wedding photo on the wall. The house whose key he once handed to his daughter, believing she and the man she married would honor it. I didn't feel anger. Anger is too expensive to waste on the unworthy. I only felt an emptiness wide, dark, and silent like the ocean at low tide. Ryan crossed his arms. "This is our house now," a simple sentence, but it cracked something in the foundation of my life, something I knew would never be repaired. Amy sat frozen. My little girl, the one who always avoided conflict, chose silence that night. And her silence told me one thing. She was standing with the man who had just humiliated me. I rose from the table. No argument, no questions, no resistance. Just the quiet steps of a man walking toward a different kind of truth. Outside, winter wind slapped my face, pulling every ounce of warmth out of me. The Christmas lights along the porch roof reflected in my eyes long fractured streaks like cracks spreading across a sheet of glass. I looked down Magnolia Street, families gathered, laughter floating from warm windows. The scent of cinnamon baked ham and peace drifted down the road. But none of it belonged to this house. Not anymore. I exhaled. And in that moment, something small but sharp moved inside me like a splinter shifting under old skin. I had spent my whole life teaching others about respect, but I had never learned how to defend my own. That Christmas Eve wasn't humiliation. It was an awakening, the beginning of a silence that would change everything. When I walked back into the dining room, Ryan was still tapping his fingers on the table waiting for my answer. I looked straight at him. No words, no emotion. I simply placed my napkin on the plate and walked past him. Ryan tilted his head, confusion flickering in his eyes. The first moment that night he wasn't certain he'd won. Maybe he thought I had surrendered. Maybe he believed I'd pack my bags and slink out like a defeated old man. But what he didn't know was this. That night in the quiet, I began preparing to leave. And when I left, I would take this entire house with me in a way he could never imagine. And that was the real sentence issued on Christmas night. There are winter days in Florida that make you feel as if you're standing somewhere far colder, far heavier than the Sunshine State could ever admit. Days when the ocean wind carries the taste of damp metal, when gray clouds pile up like slabs of stone, when the waves crash against shore with the rhythm of a heart that's been held under pressure for far too long. That afternoon, just one day after the Christmas Eve that split my life in two, I drove to the beach in St. Augustine. The sky was dull. No twinkling lights from the houses on Magnolia Street. No families smiling for photos in front of Christmas trees. Just the ocean. Endless, indifferent. Cold as a sheet of glass pulled from the darkest part of winter. I turned off the engine and sat there. The sound of the surf repeated the sentence that had cut so deep into me the night before pay the rent or leave. Not a suggestion. Not an argument. A sentence. A verdict. I stepped out of the car wearing Ellen's old coat, the last one she ever bought. It still carried the faint floral fragrance she loved. Every time I breathed it in, the world softened. But today, even that scent couldn't hold back the cold. I found a wooden bench a few meters from the water, sat down, placed my hands on my knees. Before me, the ocean stretched out like a long, unmoving wound. I stared into it like staring into a warped mirror. Not sad, not angry, not bitter. I was beyond those things. What I felt was emptiness. Not the emptiness of loss, but the emptiness that comes after years of being eroded piece by piece, until you look at yourself and realize you've become a shadow of the man you once were. The wind picked up sharp and cold. I pulled the collar of Ellen's coat closer to my neck. My eyes stung from the salt. And then, as if carried by the wind, I heard Ellen's voice. Clear, gentle, but strong enough to cut through everything around me. People who forget gratitude always destroy themselves. You just have to wait. I remembered the first time she said those words more than 20 years ago, after I told her about an angry parent who had yelled at me for disciplining his son. Ellen took my hand and said, "Sometimes all you have to do is stand still and watch them dig their own hole." I laughed at the time, never imagining those words would someday guide the course of my own life. The waves slammed the rocks, exploding into white foam like porcelain hitting a tiled floor. I leaned back and exhaled. Ryan's voice replayed in my mind. "This is our house now. You're just staying here." And then the one I overheard later, "If he doesn't leave, I'll make him leave." I never imagined my son-in-law, the man I once tried to believe could protect my daughter, would turn my home into a battlefield. But eventually the truth always reveals itself. That Christmas Eve, it wasn't the first humiliation. It was simply the last one. The one sharp enough to cut the final thread. I pulled out my phone and opened a picture of Ellen standing on our old porch, her silver hair blowing softly in the wind, her smile steady and warm. Every time I saw her photo, I had the same thought. If she were still alive, none of this would be happening. Amy wouldn't dare stay silent. Ryan wouldn't dare raise his voice. And I wouldn't have let myself be pushed aside so quietly. The emptiness inside me shifted, forming into something thin, sharp, unmistakable. Someone once said, "The quiet death inside a man is always the sign of a decision being born." And sitting there at the edge of the sea, I knew exactly what moment I had reached. A wave slammed into the shore, spraying cold water across the rocks at my feet. I watched it, imagining my future the same way, unclear, cold, but opening. There was nothing tying me to that house anymore. No laughter, no warmth, no sense of belonging. Only one thing kept me standing there: my dignity. A dignity I had abandoned to keep the peace. Abandoned out of love for Amy. Abandoned because I believed Ryan would eventually learn respect. But Christmas Eve had shown me there was nothing left to protect. And that was the moment I stood up. Not from the bench, but inside myself. By the time I drove home, the sky had gone fully dark. The Christmas lights along the neighborhood flickered like small fires in the cold wind. But my house stood in shadow, a dark, silent window in a street full of warmth. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark. A habit I'd developed years ago whenever I needed to gather my thoughts. I opened my eyes and looked in the rearview mirror. An old man stared back, eyes tired, slightly swollen after a night of no sleep. But there was something new there. Resolution. Clarity. The cold steadiness of a man who's been pushed to the edge one time too many and has finally decided to step forward instead of back. I opened the door, stepped onto the porch, my hand on the doorknob metal cold as ice. I pushed it open. The house wasn't filled with the scent of Christmas anymore. It was filled with tension. Ryan's voice came instantly. No dishes, no pretense, no politeness. Just him. Loud, harsh, furious. If he doesn't leave, I'll make him leave. I stood in the doorway. He didn't know I was there. I heard every word like steel scraping across my ear. He went on louder. He's old. He's useless. He's in my way. Every word a blow. Not to my chest, but to my pride. I stepped into the room quietly. Ryan turned. He froze. Amy sat a few feet away, eyes red from crying. I didn't look at either of them for long. I simply said I heard everything. My voice wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was just steady. Ryan forced a thin, awkward smile. "Oh, you're back." I lifted one hand barely. He fell silent instantly. Amy stood. "Dad." I looked at her. Sadness, but no weakness. "This isn't your battle." Not an accusation, a conclusion. Amy sank back into her seat, shoulders trembling. I walked past them, up the stairs, one step at a time, each step carrying the weight of years of being overlooked, of swallowing disrespect, of sacrificing my peace to preserve a peace that was never real. But that night, I was done. I closed my bedroom door, locked it. The room was cold, dim. I turned on the lamp beside the bed. Light spilled across the photograph of Ellen and me, our wedding day. I touched the frame. Cold metal under my fingertips. "You were right, Ellen," I whispered. "People who forget gratitude destroy themselves." I sat on the edge of the bed, took a long breath, and made a promise. Quiet, private final tomorrow. I will stand up, silently, but sharp enough that they will remember it for the rest of their lives, because I knew in that moment that the foundation of this family had cracked. And once a foundation cracks, everything above it eventually falls. There are places you walk into where the past doesn't feel like memory. It feels like breath, like something old still clinging to the walls. Jordan Blake's law office was one of those places. I hadn't stepped inside it for nearly 20 years. But the moment I opened the door, the scent of pine wood mixed with old paper hit me, pulling me back to a rainy afternoon long ago. A day when a skinny, exhausted boy stood in front of my desk with a suspension notice in his trembling hands. He had been working nights at a gas station, barely sleeping, barely keeping his grades up, carrying the weight of a father drowning in alcohol. That day I didn't sign the suspension. I signed something else, a different kind of document. A chance. A chance for that boy not to become a mirror of the man who raised him. Now that same boy stood before me as a grown man, a lawyer, the person I went to after a Christmas Eve that tilted my life off its axis. Jordan looked up the second he saw me at his doorway. First came surprise, then something close to sorrow. Mr. Reeves. Good Lord. It's been so long. I nodded, keeping my voice calm. Hello, Jordan. He stepped forward and hugged me. Not a polite hug, but the kind given by someone who still carries an old debt in his heart. A debt I had long forgotten, but one he never could. He stepped back and studied me. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone realizing life has worn you down in places no one sees. Come in, please. Sit. Let me get some coffee. I smiled. No need. Just do what you usually do. While he moved to the corner to prepare the drinks, I looked around. Framed certificates. A photo of him on the day he became the youngest attorney in St. Johns County. Another picture, him and his little boy at kindergarten graduation. All of it made me think of Ellen. How proud she would have been. How different Magnolia Street might have been if she were still here. Jordan set 2 cups down and pulled a chair in front of me. You holding up okay, sir? I gave a faint smile. Better than when I'm at home. His face tightened. He understood immediately. Amy called me on Christmas Eve. She said you were having some trouble. But looking at you now, I know it's more than that. I didn't want small talk. I opened my briefcase and placed the property title documents on his desk. Jordan froze for a moment. Then he began flipping through the pages slowly, carefully, not wasting a single expression. By the 4th page, his eyes sharpened. By the 6th, he pressed his palm flat onto the stack the way someone ends a verdict. Sir, you are the sole owner. Your name is on the title, on the deed. Even the utility accounts are under you. I looked at him, my voice steady, flat as a calm sea. Explain it plainly. Jordan inhaled. They have no right to evict you, no right to sell, no right to refinance, no right to anything. Each word hit the wooden table like a stone dropped from a height. I wasn't surprised, only affirmed. Affirmed that Ryan's outburst on Christmas Eve wasn't just wrong, it was stupid. Ungrateful in a way that bordered on self-inflicted ruin. Jordan leaned back, arms crossed. Why did you let them live with you? No deed transfer, no title update. You trusted them that much. I glanced at the sliver of sunlight falling onto my old outstanding educator medal inside my briefcase. Trust. Not exactly. I just wanted to hold the family together a little longer. Jordan's expression softened. You always do that, sir. You always give people more than they deserve. I shook my head. Not this time. Jordan opened a drawer and pulled out another file. What do you want me to do? Just say the word. I'll handle everything. I looked at my hands, the calloused hands of a man who spent decades teaching right from wrong. Hands Ryan dismissed as a burden. I placed my palm on the desk light, but firm. Start small, I said. Verify the title. Verify ownership. Check every transaction. Clean everything up. Discreetly. Jordan nodded without hesitation. So, you don't want them to know. I looked toward the window. The January afternoon sun sliced the room into 2 perfect halves, light and dark. They don't need to know, I said. Everyone has a lesson to learn. And the real lessons usually arrive quietly. Jordan leaned back. You know, I always thought you were the gentlest man I ever met. I smiled just barely. Being gentle doesn't mean letting people walk over you. That made Jordan shiver a little, not from fear, but from recognition. There was no anger in my voice, just certainty. Certainty from a man who had finally had enough. Jordan closed the file, signed a form, and slid it toward me. Then we start today. I signed. My handwriting was still straight, still firm, a promise to myself. Before I stood, Jordan spoke softly. "Sir, you gave me my life. Let me repay a piece of it now." I studied him. In the man of 35, I still saw the boy who once stood trembling at my classroom door. "You owe me nothing," I said, "but if you want to help me stand up in the quietest way possible." Jordan nodded, a half smile forming not of joy, but of someone who knows a storm is coming. "Silence can be a punch too, Mr. Reeves." I picked up my briefcase. "No," I said as I turned. "It's a verdict." Outside, the coastal wind hit my face, cold but clarifying. In the parking lot, I caught my reflection in the car window. An old man, silver hair, a worn coat, but in the eyes something new, not anger, not bitterness, a waking, a rising, an ending. I opened the door and set my briefcase on the passenger seat. The files inside shifted with a soft thud, the sound of a plan beginning. I whispered just for myself, "All right, Ryan, you want me out of that house?" I started the engine. "Then I'll leave. But before I do, you'll learn what it feels like to be forced out of something that was never yours." I drove away. The fading afternoon light slid across the windshield like the edge of a blade. And that January evening, everything truly began. No shouting, no fight, no noise, just one man finally choosing to rise. Some summers don't begin with sunlight, they begin with silence. A strange kind of silence, heavy, suspended like the breath the ocean takes before it folds itself into a towering wave. February and March of that year were a summer like that. The house on Magnolia Street, once filled with Ellen's laughter and Amy's soft humming, now held only the whir of an old ceiling fan, the metallic thud of Ryan's beer cans hitting the table, and the quiet sigh I let out each time I planted new seeds in the soil. I started living as if nothing had happened, as if Christmas Eve, as if pay the rent or leave had never been spoken. Every morning I woke at 6, watered the lavender along the porch, took the trash out at exactly 7:15 just in time for the garbage truck, mowed the lawn on weekends, straight lines as crisp as the bullet points I used to grade essays with. From the outside it looked like I was forgetting, but in truth, I was preparing. Silence wasn't surrender. It was construction, layer by layer, piece by piece, of an ending no one in that house would see coming. My neighbor Linda Harris noticed before anyone else. She always noticed everything on the street, partly because she owned the flower shop, but mostly because she had the kind of heart that recognized pain even when no one spoke of it. One morning she stood by the fence holding a pot of rosemary. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, concern tucked under her words. "Are you doing all right?" I was watering the plants. The spray from the hose caught the sunlight, forming a thin mist between us. I looked up and gave her a smile, the same calm smile that always unsettled Ryan. "I'm fine, Linda," I said. "I'm just learning the art of staying quiet." She watched me longer than usual. Then she set the rosemary on the fence between our yards. "If you need anything," she said, "I'm right here." I nodded, because the truth was simple. Need no, I didn't. No, yes, I did. People like Linda were the kind Ryan would never understand, people who weren't flashy, weren't loud, but saw changes in others before those changes even had names. And what she saw in me was the biggest change of my life. Inside the house, things were different. Ryan was coming apart at the seams. He was losing contracts. Every phone call from his brokerage ended with a slammed fist and a shouted, "Damn it, papers were thrown." Doors were shut too hard. He blamed the economy. He blamed his clients. He blamed the market. And when all else failed, he blamed me. I heard it all. Not once did I raise my voice. Not once did I bite back. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the ceiling fan, I heard him bark at Amy. "Why is he still here? If he doesn't like it, he can leave." Amy stayed silent as always. That silence hurt more than anything Ryan ever said. But that night, when I sat down for dinner, Ryan didn't look at me like a father-in-law. He looked at me like an obstacle. He planted his palms on the table, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Just leave if you can't handle it." His voice wasn't angry. It was triumphant. The tone of a man who believed he was winning a battle he thought I didn't even know we were fighting. I lifted my eyes to him, studying every detail, the arrogant squint, the smirk, the blind confidence of someone standing on cracked ground while thinking it was granite. And then I smiled, just a small smile. But it made Ryan pause, half an inch, half a breath. He pushed his chair back the slightest bit, not from fear but from instinct. Because somewhere inside him something whispered that the pieces he was playing with were starting to shift. He could feel the tilt. Something wasn't in place anymore. And he was right. I was no longer in the place he expected me to be, the place of endurance, the place of silence as submission. I set my knife on the table. "You don't need to say it twice," I said. Amy looked up, her eyes trembling. But Ryan squinted the way a man does when someone he underestimated moves in a direction he didn't foresee. "What did you just say?" he asked. I stood, pushed my chair in perfect alignment like the old faculty meetings where everything had its order. I said, I repeated calmly, "You don't need to say it twice." And I walked away. No one spoke another word. But that moment all three of us knew I wasn't just responding to his little challenge about leaving. I was answering something much bigger. From that moment on, silence grew in the house like a widening pit. Later that night I sat on the porch watching Magnolia Street under the dim yellow glow of the street lamps. In my mind were the lessons I had drilled into thousands of students. Never let others define your worth. Never stay silent in the face of injustice. Respect is earned through action, not appeasement. And yet for months, I had lived the opposite of everything I taught. Not anymore. I looked down at my hands, veins standing out, hands that grated papers, repaired roofs, and once held Ellen's hand with all the gentleness of a man who knew he'd found home. Those hands would take back the house that belonged to me. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with law, silence, and perfect timing. Jordan's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't need them to know anything. Justice has its own clock. They'll understand when the moment arrives." And I realized this wasn't about a house. This was about me. About the part of me I had let erode. The days that followed made everything clearer. Ryan unraveled faster. Every call from his office ended with another slam, another curse. One day he broke a glass. Amy had to kneel on the floor picking up the shards. I watched from the stairs. Quietly, coldly, and I saw it clearly. People who live on arrogance always fear silence. Because in silence, they can't hear the applause they believe they deserve. And I had been silent long enough to terrify him. He began watching me differently, not as a burden, but as something unreadable. Not loud, not reactive, not angry, but steady. Predictable in my habits, unpredictable in my intentions. For the first time, he didn't know what I was thinking. For the first time, he sensed a shift, and for the first time, he stepped back. Only half a step, but I saw it, and I knew. Half a step would be the first of many things he would lose. On the last night of March, I sat in my room looking at an old calendar. A red circle still marked December 25th. Next to it, the words I had written the night of the blow: "Pay the rent or leave." I stared at the words for a long, long moment. No pain, no anger. Just one quiet thought: I'll leave. But not alone. I would take the house, his future, everything he thought belonged to him, and it would all happen in silence. A silence long enough, sharp enough to cut straight through every layer of arrogance he wrapped around himself. That summer didn't begin with sunshine. It began with a smile, small, dangerous, curling at the corner of my mouth. A smile that made Ryan take half a step back. A smile that said, "A gentle man has stopped being gentle. And from here on, everything will change. There are prices that aren't measured in money, And there are wars that don't begin with gunfire, but with a single sheet of paper placed on a desk. April of 2025 was a month like that. Spring in Florida was warmer than usual, but inside Jordan Blake's office the air felt as cold as a courtroom, not because of the air conditioning, but because of what sat inside the file between us. $780,000. Jordan said the number without a tremor, without raising his voice. He simply set the appraisal report on the table quietly, almost casually. But I knew the weight of it. The real weight. The weight of a war measured in the greed of my son-in-law. "There's a couple ready to buy right now," Jordan said, pushing the folder toward me. "Retired, from Chicago. Cash buyers, no haggling." I looked at the number. Clear ink, straight lines, emotionless. Unlike me, who was feeling something very specific. Finality. Not the end of me, but the end of something that had been rotting inside the Magnolia Street house for a long, long time. Jordan laced his fingers together. "Sir," he hesitated, then asked the real question. Are you sure he wasn't asking about the sale, or the money, or the logistics? He was asking, "Are you ready to cut the last string tying you to that family?" I didn't answer right away. I looked toward the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass and fell across the wall where Jordan's degrees hung. In that light I saw the Honor Teacher Award I had brought him days earlier, a reminder of who I had been. It once hung in my living room, until the day Ryan looked at it and scoffed. "Why do you keep that?" Those days are over. Now the plaque glowed gold under the afternoon sun, steady, silent, unwavering. And I finally said, "I'm not selling a house. I'm reclaiming respect." Jordan studied my face for a long time, as if trying to see whether my voice held calm or a storm. I spoke again, slow, deliberate. That house was mine. The respect was mine. And I'm taking back both. Jordan exhaled. Not in doubt, but in recognition. He understood perfectly. I wasn't talking about real estate. I was talking about a verdict. "You know," he said quietly, "doing this wipes everything out from under them." I nodded. "You think I'm hesitating?" Jordan pressed his lips briefly. "No," he said. "I think you're standing up in a way they never believed you could." He leaned back in his chair. "All right. If you've decided, I'll handle everything." He slid a new sheet toward me. A timeline, procedures, a projected closing date, the 3-month waiting period required by state law, a flawless plan. A plan Ryan had absolutely no idea was creeping toward him like a long, dark shadow. Jordan continued, "They won't suspect a thing. Everything is in your name. You sign and no one can contest it." I placed my fingertips on the edge of the paper. A faint tremor passed through them. Not weakness, but the coldness of the metal-sharp truth running through those documents. I waited, letting the silence settle like sand on the ocean floor. Then I signed. The pen glided steady, firm, no hesitation, no retreat. Jordan studied the signature and breathed out, "That's it. From here on, this isn't a sale." I replied immediately. "It never was." I met his eyes. "This is a silent execution." Jordan blinked the sentence colder than even I expected. When I stepped outside, the April wind blew straight against my face. It was warm, but somehow I felt cold. Not weather cold. Clarity cold. I stood by my car and saw my reflection in the window. Silver hair. Wrinkles cut deep across my forehead. An old jacket. But the eyes staring back, they weren't the eyes I had 6 months ago. No pleading. No hoping. No protecting people who didn't want protection. Just resolve. The resolve of a man pushed to his edge and stepping forward anyway, not to flee, but to walk straight into a battle on his own terms. That night I sat at my desk, the file still open. The names on the first page stood out: Richard and Margaret Chen. Good people, decent. I'd met them briefly when Jordan arranged a quiet walk-through. They didn't look at me like a burden. They didn't see the house as leverage. They saw it as a home. Something Ryan had never once seen. I closed the file. Not because of doubt, but because I'd never been more certain that house would leave the hands of someone who never deserved to touch it. The next morning, while I watered the porch plants, Ryan stormed out of the garage, slamming the door so hard the wall shook. He scowled at me, watering the lavender like nothing was wrong. "What are you doing now?" he snapped. I didn't look at him. "Keeping things clean before I go." He laughed, short, sharp, mocking. "You go where? How you gonna live on that 3-cent retirement check of yours?" I lifted my eyes to his. No anger, no bitterness, no blame, just cold clarity. "Don't worry," I said. "I know when to leave. And how." Ryan couldn't understand. He only saw that I wasn't the man he thought he could shove around. I walked past him and into the house, leaving him standing there confused by something he couldn't name. That's when I realized silence was doing its work. It was crushing his arrogance, slowly, softly, but with certainty, like a hand tightening around the throat of a man who thought he was untouchable. That night I sat alone in Ellen's old study. The lamplight cast a small circle over the contract I had signed. I rested my hand on the papers. The feel of the pages brought back the lessons I once wrote for students. There is silence that heals and silence that kills. This time, the lesson was mine. I closed my eyes. In the quiet I heard Ellen's voice so clear it felt like she was in the room. Ungrateful people destroy themselves. You don't have to lift a finger. I opened my eyes. No. This time, I was lifting a finger. I was clearing the path, loosening the foundation, letting them walk into the ending they built for themselves. And I was doing it with the one weapon they never understood: silence. Some neighbors only notice the weeds in your yard. Others notice the things you try to hide in your eyes. Linda Harris was the second kind. She lived in the cream-colored house to the left, the one with lavender blooming year-round. She brought flowers when Ellen was sick, left casseroles at our door during holidays, and always asked the same gentle question. "Do you need anything, Mr. Reeves?" People like her don't speak often, but when they have seen too much, they do. That morning was unusually quiet. The sun spilled gold across my porch. No Ryan slamming cabinets, no garage door rattling in anger, no sound of contracts hitting the kitchen table. The silence felt peaceful, but not the comforting kind. It felt like the hush before a wave rises high enough to take an entire shoreline with it. I stood in Ellen's old study, a room filled with soft echoes of everything we once were. I began packing, not hurried, not frantic, just steady, methodical, the way you prepare for a ritual. 2 stacks formed on the table. One, Ellen's favorites, To Kill a Mockingbird, Little Women East of Eden, stories of dignity, struggle, and quiet strength. The other, the $780,000 appraisal, the contract awaiting its closing date, and the legal documents Jordan had prepared. 2 worlds side by side, the past and the verdict. When I opened the lower drawer, I found my outstanding educator medal lying deep inside, buried under dust and years of silence. I hadn't touched it since Ellen died, since the house stopped being a home, since I started shrinking myself to keep the peace. I blew the dust off. It lifted into the air like ash. That's when I heard a light tap on the doorframe. I turned. Linda stood there holding a bouquet freshly cut from her garden. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the boxes, the books, the legal paperwork, until they landed on the medal in my hand. "You're really leaving?" she asked softly. I answered slowly, each word placed with care, as if setting stones in a foundation. "I'm just reclaiming what's mine." Linda blinked one slow, knowing blink. She understood. without explanation, without details. Some people only need to look at a room to understand an entire life being folded away. She set the flowers on the table and glanced around. I heard, "Well, she murmured. "Your house was a little loud last night. I thought something happened." Ryan had been yelling. I had heard every word. Linda probably had too. Our houses shared a wall. But she didn't pry, didn't gossip, didn't ask questions. She just said something soft, gentle, like a fingertip brushing over a bruise. "You shouldn't have to endure that forever." I didn't look at her. I simply placed the medal on the table beside the sale paperwork. "Linda," I said quietly, "I'm not enduring anything." Then I looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm standing up just quietly." She nodded slowly as though she'd just heard a verdict being handed down. "So, you've really decided." I gave a faint smile. "I decided on Christmas night." Linda watched me for a long moment. Not with pity, not with sadness, with respect. The kind you offer someone who has finally stopped letting people step on their dignity. She stepped forward, lifted the medal from the table, and wiped the remaining dust from it with her sleeve. "This," she said softly, "deserves to be somewhere better." She placed the medal into my hand. Not gently, not forcefully, but with just enough weight for me to feel everything it meant. Not medal, not ribbon, but value, identity, history, the man I used to be and the man I was becoming again. I curled my fingers around it. The metal made a faint click as the edges touched. Linda smiled. "You know, Mr. Reeves, people can build houses, sell houses, ruin houses. But they can't take your worth unless you hand it to them." That wasn't advice. And it wasn't a comfort. It was a switch being flipped, a silent ignition. "Thank you," I said. She rested her hand briefly on my shoulder, then walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back and said, "Some men only wake up once in their lives. And usually it's right before they change everything." The door clicked shut behind her. A small sound, but it echoed like the lock falling on the last chapter of the past. I looked around the study. Ellen's books, the legal documents, the empty boxes waiting to be filled, and the medal in my palm, a reminder of who I had once been and who Ryan never understood. I placed the medal in a black keepsake box, the only box I planned to take with me when I left this house. Not furniture, not valuables, just my worth. Later that afternoon, as I carried a stack of books down to the garage, I heard Ryan on the phone in the living room. His voice was sharp, ragged, the voice of a cornered animal. "No, I sent the offer. No, I don't care about the market. I have a plan." Then he lowered his voice, but I heard every word. "As soon as the old man's gone, everything will fall into place." I stood in the hallway, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just listening. And something inside my chest tightened, not from hurt but from understanding. Ryan didn't realize that every word he spoke was another shovelful of dirt on the grave he was digging for himself. Not with violence, with my signature. That night, Linda texted, "You okay? You looked, different today." I stared at the screen for a while, then typed, "Yes." I'm not silent in the old way anymore. She replied with just one sentence. "Good. I don't think they know what's coming." I set the phone down and looked at the medal resting on my desk. It gleamed like a small, steady truth. I had spent decades teaching students to stand up when they were disrespected. It was time to learn my own lesson. In the quiet of the room, I whispered, "They don't get to bury my worth. Not anymore." And so May ended, not with shouting, not with arguments, not with peace, but with preparation. Quiet, sharp, deliberate preparation. The kind that happens right before a life turns over, and another life collapses. Some signatures exist just to confirm agreement. Some are used to buy a house, sell a car, accept a job offer. And then there is a different kind of signature, the kind that feels like placing your pen on a death sentence someone never realized was already written. The signature I placed on the Magnolia Street contract that June belonged to that last category. No one knew. No one saw. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears falling onto the page. Only black ink, the soft scrape of a pen across paper, and a silence sharp enough to taste. Jordan Blake's office sat in a modest building along the St. Johns River. That day the sky was gray, a Florida kind of gray, heavy and metallic like the last breath before the rainy season collapses. When I stepped inside, it felt like walking into a morgue, clean, cold, orderly, and full of things about to end. Jordan stood the moment he saw me. "Right on time as always," he said. "I didn't have a reason to be late," I answered. He gave a small smile, not a happy one, but the kind worn by someone about to watch a life turn over, knowing he's the one holding the scalpel. Jordan set the file on the table. It wasn't long. It wasn't complicated, but it felt like a verdict written in perfect margins. Across the first page, purchase and sale agreement. Magnolia Street property price, $780,000. Buyers, Richard and Margaret Chen. Closing date 3 months from today as the law required. I looked at those lines. Every word was a pair of scissors cutting the final thread, tying me to the home where Ellen and I spent 30 years together. Jordan slid his chair closer. "You still want to sign?" he asked. It wasn't a question for the unsure. It was a question asked before someone crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I looked down at my hands. Hands that once shook the day Ellen got her diagnosis. Hands that went weak after her funeral. Hands that clenched for the first time when Ryan said, "Pay the rent or leave." Today, those hands didn't shake. They were still the stillness of a blade before it comes down. "I do," I said. Jordan pushed the pen toward me. "Do you want to warn them first?" he asked gently. I lifted my eyes to his. There was no anger in me, no bitterness, no triumph, just truth. No. They'll understand when it's time. Jordan closed his eyes briefly, a quiet gesture of respect. Then I lowered the pen. The sound it made on the paper, thin, cold, unmistakable, could have been amplified into the sound of the collapse of greed, the shattering of a stolen plan, the fall of arrogance. I signed once, then 3 more times for the additional pages. The ink dried slowly. When I placed the pen on the table, Jordan didn't speak for several seconds. The air felt thick, like all the doors in the room had shut at once. He gathered the documents, straightened them. "That's it," he said. "You're no longer tied to that house." I nodded. No, thank you. No, finally. No breath of relief. Just silence. Because words would have cheapened it. Jordan stood, poured 2 glasses of water. "Is there anything you want to say?" He asked, his voice the same tone doctors use when handing over life-changing results, good or bad. I looked out the window. The June clouds were gathering, dark, layered, waiting. In the corner of my wallet, I felt the edge of a familiar piece of paper. Ellen's letter, 8 years old. Folded and refolded until the creases became part of the paper itself. I took it out. Jordan didn't speak. He just watched. I opened the letter and found the line I needed. I heard Ellen's voice, clear, steady, the voice I never forgot. Never let the weak decide your worth. My fingers tightened around the paper. A small crease formed almost like a heartbeat under my hand. "I did the right thing," I said quietly. Jordan nodded. "You did the only thing you could." He slipped the contract into a hard file folder and clicked the clasp shut. "From this moment on," he said, "they can't do anything. No lawsuits, no objections, no delays." He looked me squarely in the eye. "You've locked the door. They have no way back in." When I stepped out of his office, rain had begun. Not heavy rain. A thin, steady drizzle, the kind that feels like the sky is washing something away. I paused under the awning and watched the droplets strike the pavement, shattering into tiny pieces of glass. just like Ryan's fantasies about owning the house. I walked through the rain to my car, opened the door, and sat quietly with Ellen's letter in my hand. I read the line again. Never let the weak decide your worth. Ellen always knew me better than anyone, and if she were alive, she'd say, "It's time, Gordon. Time to take back what they thought they could take from you." I folded the letter and tucked it into my shirt pocket near my heart, where I needed it most. That night in Ellen's old room, I turned on the small lamp. Its warm light fell across half-packed boxes. Nobody knew what I'd signed that afternoon. Ryan didn't know. Amy didn't know. No one knew that the house they were eating in, arguing, and ignoring me in, no longer belonged to them from the moment the pen touched paper. In 3 months' closing day, they would stand at the doorway with the exact expression I could already picture: stunned, wide-eyed, heart-dropping, unable to understand. 3 months, just 3, and everything would change. No shouting, no police, no fight. Just one bright red sign: sold. I leaned back in the chair, staring out into the dark night, and I whispered a sentence only I was meant to hear. A real execution always begins with a signature, and mine was already written. Some truths don't arrive like thunder. Some arrive quietly inside a single sheet of paper that slips out of someone's pocket. For Amy, the truth of her life arrived one hot July afternoon. The kind of heat that burns the air but leaves your heart feeling cold the moment reality touches it. The Magnolia Street house was unusually quiet. Ryan wasn't home. He was meeting clients, or more accurately, grasping at the last threads of a career that was sinking like a stone. Amy had gone into his home office, a room he hadn't allowed her to enter for months, to find a file he'd texted her about. She opened the desk drawer. Inside, chaotic stacks of contracts, letters, business cards, and hurried scribbles on torn paper. Then a single sheet slid out of one folder and drifted to the floor. She picked it up. Thin paper, slightly wrinkled at the edges. But what froze her, what drained the blood from her face, was the bold title at the top. Quitclaim deed, Magnolia Street property, a property transfer. Name of grantor, Gordon Reeves. Signature below, jagged, shaky, nothing like the handwriting she'd seen her father use for 60 years. A forged signature. Amy's knees weakened. She had to grip the desk to stay upright. No, no, no. This couldn't. She read it again slowly, carefully. Date signed blank. Notary section blank. Name of grantee. Ryan Dalton already filled in. Property address clear. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears like a hammer striking wood. And then the words escaped her, a whisper cracked and breathless. "You were going to steal my father's house?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. That was when Ryan walked in. He saw the paper in her hand. And in his eyes, no shock, no guilt, no fear. Just a coldness he'd clearly prepared long ago. He smirked, a small, sharp smile that crawled up Amy's spine. "He's in the way." 3 words. 3 words that slammed the door on years of excuses, self-deception, and rationalizations Ryan's just stressed. "He's under pressure. He'll treat Dad better if I try harder." Those lies burst like glass bulbs in heat. Amy stared into her husband's eyes, and in one knife-edged moment she saw the truth she had avoided for 3 years. Not a struggling man, not a husband who misspoke, not someone who just needed patience, but a man capable of cruelty. A man who believed he had the right to push a 66-year-old widower, the man who bought this house with a lifetime of work straight out of his own life. A man she never should have trusted. Ryan stepped forward, snatched the paper from her hand. "Don't make a big deal out of this," he said. His voice dropped, sharp, controlled, dangerous. "He's leaving. The sooner you accept it, the easier it'll be." Amy backed away. "Easier for who?" "Ryan." Her voice shook, but it came out clear. "For us," he snapped. "Just because someone's your father doesn't mean a—" Amy cut him off. "You're talking about my father like he's an obstacle." Ryan shrugged. "He is an obstacle. Some moments in life rearrange your entire memory like shaking a puzzle that was incorrectly assembled for years. In Amy's mind, images flashed like a film rewinding too fast. Her father standing in the rain to pick them up after a fight. Her father fixing the porch himself in the summer heat. Her father paying their car insurance in 2022 when Ryan lost his job. Her father setting the table and asking, "Are you two doing okay?" even when he himself was being treated like an afterthought. And Ryan never once saying thank you. Never treating Gordon like a human being, only like an ATM he could punch whenever he needed something. Amy's chest tightened, not from pain, from awakening. A bitter, scalding kind of clarity. And out of her mouth came a sentence she didn't know she had in her. "He should have left us a long time ago." Ryan froze, eyes wide. The first true shock she'd ever seen on his face. Amy walked out of the room. Not crying, not screaming, just walking straight quick the way you flee a building right before it collapses. She drove to Jordan Blake's office. Her hands shook so badly she had to pull over twice. When she entered, Jordan looked up, alarm on his face. "Amy." "What happened?" She handed him the forged deed. No words came out. Breathing barely did. Jordan skimmed it. His expression hardened. "This signature," he said quietly, "is fake. Very fake." Amy broke a raw, childlike sob as if the world had cracked beneath her feet. "My dad. He doesn't deserve this," she cried. "He's quiet. He's kind. He lets everyone step first. And I let them treat him like this." Jordan stood, handed her tissues. His voice lowered steady like someone used to delivering difficult truths. "Amy." He set the forged deed on the table. "Your father already sold the house." She looked up, stunned. Jordan continued, "But he did it legally, calmly, without a single insult, without drama, without a fight." Amy cried harder. Jordan placed a hand on her shoulder, then said the sentence that hit her like a falling beam. "He chose not to take revenge, but that doesn't mean he didn't see." The words crushed her, not because Jordan condemned Ryan, but because the person he was talking about was her. She chose blindness. Her father chose sight. And his silence came not from weakness but from disappointment too deep to speak. Amy wiped her eyes. "I need to see him. I need to apologize." Jordan shook his head gently. "No need to rush. He knows you're hurting, and he's never been angry at you." Her voice trembled. "How can you be so sure?" Jordan gave a sad, faint smile. "Because your father is the kind of good man who makes everyone else ashamed of themselves." When Amy left the office, she stood in the heat of the parking lot for a long time. Hot wind slapped her face. Her hands still shook as she stared at the forged deed in its evidence envelope. She looked toward Magnolia Street, for the first time in years. She didn't see a house. She saw two men. Her father, who stayed quiet to protect what little family he had left, and her husband, who stayed quiet to destroy someone else's. And Amy understood finally. Understood. It wasn't her father who changed. It was Amy who finally opened her eyes. Some days fate doesn't raise its voice. It simply waits at the end of your driveway, silent, patient, and lets you walk straight into it. Closing day on the Magnolia Street house was one of those days. September. Florida heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, but the sky had that pale, exhausted gray that marks the end of a season and the end of a man. That morning I stood in the yard, hands clasped behind my back, staring up at the porch I once fixed with my own hands. The wood had faded. The nails had rusted. And I remembered Ellen standing right there smiling as she watched me drop a hammer on my foot for the 10th time in one afternoon. She once said, "A house is where you're loved, never where you're pushed out." I swallowed hard. A breeze carried the scent of Linda's lavender across the yard, soft as Ellen's last touch. I stood still, calm, unmoved, because I knew exactly what was coming. 10:42 a.m. The hum of a Lexus engine broke the quiet at the end of Magnolia Street. A familiar car, a familiar silhouette, Ryan Dalton. And he wasn't alone. 3 people stepped out with him, the secret buyers he'd lined up, his grand victory plan, the deal he believed would make him look brilliant while making me look old and irrelevant. Ryan walked ahead with the confidence of a man who thought he was about to pull off the biggest win of his life. He even checked his hair in the side mirror, a habit he reserved for moments he wanted to impress. If he had known what waited for him, he wouldn't have bothered fixing a single strand. As the car rolled closer, I saw the exact second his expression changed. The color drained from his face. His jaw clenched. His eyes widened as if he were staring at the ghost of his own future. Because he saw the sign. The bright red, unavoidable sign planted cleanly in the front yard: sold. Not for sale. Not under contract. Sold. White letters on a red background, a final stamp closing the coffin on his arrogance. He slammed the brakes. One of the buyers nearly hit the seat in front of them. I didn't move. I stood still, like part of the landscape. Ryan stepped out of the car. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the salesman's smile. He looked at the sign, then at me, as if the ground beneath him had turned into thin ice. "You..." His voice cracked. "What did you do?" It wasn't a shout. Not yet. It was the trembling whisper of a man who had just realized he was no longer in control of anything. I answered softly, so softly it made him panic even more. "You told me to pay rent or leave." He swallowed hard. A vein tightened in his neck. I continued each word sharp and slow. "I chose to leave." I paused just long enough for silence to cut him open. "After selling my house." The buyers turned to him, confused, embarrassed, uneasy. They didn't know the backstory, but they understood one thing immediately. Ryan Dalton had just shown them a house he never owned. Ryan stammered, "And, no, you can't, I... He stumbled backward, eyes darting around like a man being hunted with no exit in sight. That was when Jordan appeared from behind the fence, pressed shirt, folder in hand, expression calm, almost peaceful. He nodded at me, the nod of someone who had done exactly what he promised. Then he handed the keys to Richard and Margaret Chen, the real buyers. "Congratulations," Jordan said. "Today is closing day. This home is officially yours." Richard shook my hand. Margaret thanked me warmly. Then they walked past Ryan without so much as a glance, like he was nothing more than a stranger loitering in the driveway. Ryan watched it all as if someone had ripped out the last page of his life and rewrote it in ink he couldn't erase. He lunged toward me, voice raw. You can't do this. This is my house. This is my house and Amy's." I looked at him without blinking. "No," I said quietly. "This was my house. I gestured to the sold sign. And now it belongs to none of us." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I tilted my head, voice still soft. "You said I was a guest. Guests leave." I stepped aside. I left. He stepped back. I stepped forward. Not threatening, not loud, just enough to show he no longer dictated the space between us. You couldn't have done this alone," he muttered, voice trembling. "Someone helped you." I looked straight into him. "No, Ryan. I did this because of you." His lips shook. I spoke the sentence he will remember for the rest of his life. "Your greed signed this contract for me." Jordan approached, opening the file. "Mr. Dalton," he said calmly, "you have no ownership here. None. Legally, everything belongs to Mr. Reeves." He handed Ryan a copy of the real contract. Ryan grabbed it, the pages rattling in his shaking hands. "No, this can't, I..." Jordan's voice stayed even. "You never had anything here in the first place." Ryan looked around at the buyers, at the house, at Jordan, and at Amy, who had just stepped out from the back door, drawn by the sound of his panic. Amy froze. Her eyes landed on the sold sign. Then on me. There was no anger there, no resentment, no sorrow, only relief, the quiet relief of someone finally seeing justice arrive. Ryan's eyes swung back to me, and for the first time since I had known him, his face showed no pride, no condescension, no smug certainty, only fear. A deep primal fear of a man who bet everything against someone he thought was weak, only to learn that he never understood strength at all. I stood tall, inhaled slowly. Ryan, I said, this is the last lesson I can give you. I took half a step back, letting the wind move between us. No one can take what doesn't belong to them. Something cracked. Not the air, not the ground, but something inside him visible in his face, like a heart breaking onto skin. I turned and walked away. No hurry, no triumph, because I didn't need to look back. Jordan handed the keys to the new owners. The sold sign trembled in the warm September wind, and Ryan stood there frozen, silent, small like a schoolyard bully finally slapped by the life he thought he could cheat. It was the first time he ever knew fear. Not fear of losing a house, but fear of facing a man he thought he could break, and discovering that man had never been broken. Only waiting. Some autumns don't begin with falling leaves. They begin with silence, the kind of silence that no longer smells of endurance, but of release. The kind of silence a person hears when they finally walk out of a prison their own family built around them. In October, when I arrived in Asheville, I knew a new chapter of my life had begun. No more Ryan shouting in my face. No more bills slammed onto the table as if I were an unwanted guest. No more footsteps dripping contempt through the hallway. Only golden woods, crisp mountain air, and a small cabin tucked into the hillside. A place no one could push me out of. A place that finally belonged to me. The cabin was modest old pine panels, fogged windows, in the morning a backyard with bushes still holding on to their color. I remember the first time I turned the new key in the lock. The soft click sounded like a door closing, not just on a house, but on an old life. I hadn't brought much with me. 3 boxes of books. A small box of Ellen's photographs. The metal Linda wiped clean. And Ellen's letter always in the left pocket of my coat. I set my bags down and opened the cabin door wide to the wind. No one yelled after me. No one asked when I planned to leave. No one told me I wasn't contributing. There was only the forest breeze. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath and didn't feel pain in my chest. The next morning, I walked down to the town library. The librarian Mary Ellen listened as I introduced myself, a retired principal with years of teaching literature. She smiled gently. Would you like to help our kids learn to read? We're always short on volunteers. And that was it. No probing questions, no suspicion, no judgment, just a simple, sincere invitation. That afternoon, I sat at a small table by the window with 3 children. Evan, 7, slow reader. Chloe, 9, lost her father early. Lucas, 8, silent and withdrawn. I opened a book and read slowly, steadily. Their eyes brightened line by line. Why is this word read like that? Evan asked. I laughed a real laugh, the first in a long time. Because English can be as stubborn as the rest of us, I said. The children giggled, and for the first time in months I felt valuable. Not valuable to be used, but valuable because I existed. That evening I sat on the cabin porch watching sunlight spill through golden leaves. I unpacked the lavender Linda had given me, still alive after the long drive, and began planting it in new soil. Lavender, Ellen's favorite. She used to say, even when it breaks, it grows. Even in strong winds, it keeps its scent. I pressed my hands into the soil. It was cold but alive. The lavender scent drifted through the breeze like a blessing from the 2 most gentle spirits in my life, Ellen and Linda. I looked up. The Asheville sky had turned the color of warm honey. No Ryan slamming doors. No Amy standing frozen in the aftermath. No tension clawing at my ribs. Just me and a life no longer owned by anyone else. My phone rang. Peter, my son. The one child who never turned his back on me. I answered. Dad. He said, his voice warm, familiar, like a light at the end of a long hallway. You made it to the new place. I smiled at the forest in front of me. Yeah, son, I'm here. There was a pause, soft, emotional. Then, Dad, I'm proud of you. I closed my eyes. Those words arrived softly, but they struck like a cathedral bell ringing through an empty sanctuary. "You did the right thing," Peter said. "I only wish you'd left them sooner." I watched the sky shift to amber. "It's all right, son. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be now." Peter laughed quietly through the receiver. "When are you coming to Oregon to see your granddaughter?" "When the snow melts," I told him. We both chuckled. The call ended, but the warmth remained like a coat draped over my shoulders in the cold autumn air. That night I stepped onto the porch with my wooden chair. The wind grew stronger, sending yellow leaves swirling like old hands waving me into a new life. I looked up at the sky. No sold sign. No one waiting to steal my home. No one counting my expenses or measuring my worth. Only one sentence echoed in my memory. Ellen's voice, soft but unwavering. "A home is where you're at peace, not where you endure." And finally, I had found that place. Not a mansion, not a big family house, not a table overflowing with relatives, but a place where no one treated me like a burden, a place where I could breathe, a place where I could be myself again. I leaned back in the chair. The forest hummed like a lullaby, and I whispered, not for anyone else to hear, just for the autumn sky, I didn't lose my home. I simply walked away from people who were never worthy of living in it. And with that, my autumn truly began. Some verdicts aren't read in a courtroom. No judge, no gavel, no bailiff shouting order. Some verdicts arrive through a morning newscast delivered in a steady voice as calm and cold as a clock announcing the hour of someone's downfall. On the first morning of November 2025, that was how I heard Ryan's sentence. My small Asheville cabin was wrapped in early fog. Moisture clung to the window panes. I stood in the kitchen pouring water into the coffee pot, the sound soft and steady, like the heartbeat of a man who had finally found a peaceful life. The radio played in the background, same local station as always. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Weather update, traffic report, a reminder about the town's fall festival. And then the anchor's voice changed lower, slower, sharper. Breaking news. Real estate agent Ryan Dalton is now under federal investigation for contract fraud and document falsification. My hand froze above the counter. The voice continued. His real estate license was revoked early this morning. Bank accounts have been temporarily frozen pending investigation. Potential victims are encouraged to contact the Department of Legal Affairs. I didn't gasp, didn't curse, didn't even blink. I simply stood there silent as stone, listening to the sound of consequences clawing their way up from the pit Ryan had dug for himself. I turned off the stove burner, placed my coffee cup on the wooden counter. The cup made a soft tap, but in the stillness of the cabin, it sounded like the lid closing on a coffin. Outside, Asheville's morning forest shimmered under thick fog. Wind moved through the trees, shaking the last golden leaves still hanging on. Nobody out there knew what had just happened hundreds of miles away in Florida. But I knew, and the strangest part was, I didn't feel anything. Not joy, not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a quiet, steel-cold truth. It was time. I stepped out onto the porch, sitting in the old wooden chair watching the lavender sway with the autumn breeze. Each stem trembled as if nodding in agreement with what I had just heard. The wind brushed past my ears, cold, sharp, but familiar. I closed my eyes. Asheville cold wasn't like Florida cold. It seeped deeper into bone, into memory, into clarity. It told you what was worth keeping and what was meant to be left behind. I thought of Ryan, of Amy, of that Christmas night when he threw the bill on the table and shouted, "Pay the rent or leave." I thought of the bright red sign that followed months later, sold. And I thought of today, the day he realized he couldn't scream at the law the way he screamed at me. I opened my eyes. No mist in them, only calm. And I spoke quietly, so softly the wind almost carried it away. Own actions, own consequences, No hatred, no triumph, no venom, just truth as clean and simple as arithmetic. I lifted the cup again and took a sip. Coffee mixed with the scent of old pine and freshly planted lavender, a blend of peace Ryan would never know. Not because I took it from him, but because he threw it away the same way he threw away his own integrity. The radio kept going. Reporters breaking down the charges, document fraud, unauthorized contract alteration, tampering with transactions, evidence of signature forgery. All things I had seen months earlier, but I wasn't the one who judged him. Life did it for me. People say karma is slow. They're wrong. Karma arrives precisely when the guilty person believes they've gotten away. Ryan believed exactly that, which is why the impact hit him so hard today. I reached over and turned off the radio, not because I pitied him, but because I didn't need to hear more. Consequences don't require an audience. I didn't need proof he was paying for it. I only needed one thing, a life free of him. And I already had it. That afternoon I walked down to the lake behind the cabin. The water was dark and perfectly still, so still it became a mirror. But it didn't reflect faces. It reflected the weight sitting on one's conscience. I looked at my reflection. A 66-year-old man. White hair. Lined face. But a face no longer burdened. I thought of Ellen. Of her handwriting in the letter I carried everywhere. Never let the weak determine your worth. And now, finally, I understood. The most dangerous people are not the strong. They're the weak, the ones who use their smallness to gnaw at others. Ryan wasn't a powerful enemy. He was a fragile one, weak in character, weak in integrity, weak in gratitude. And so, he destroyed himself. I didn't push him. I simply stepped off the road he was already digging into the ground. I stood up. The autumn wind circled my feet, sending leaves spiraling around me. I whispered not to Ryan, not to the world, but to myself. Peace isn't winning. Peace is no longer needing to fight. That was what Asheville gave me. Not revenge, but a return to myself. Ryan's downfall far away in Florida wasn't my victory. It was simply the final predictable chapter of a man who chose the wrong path and never turned back. And so November began with an unfamiliar quiet. No slammed doors, no shouting, no bills thrown at me like insults. Just wind in the trees, and one sentence soft enough to close an entire old life. Own actions, own consequences. Some evenings pass like a blade. Beautiful, gleaming, and capable of drawing blood if you touch them the wrong way. The evening of November 20th, 2025 was one of those evenings. I sat by the lake behind my cabin. The water was still smooth as black glass, reflecting a sky streaked with violet like dried blood. Pine drifted in on the wind, mixed with the scent of lavender I had planted 2 months earlier. The world was quiet, a kind of quiet I'd spent years trying to find again. My phone vibrated. A message. Amy. I opened it slowly. I'm sorry. Thank you for never getting revenge on me. I stared at those words for a long time, long enough for the sun to slide halfway down the lake's horizon. No one knew what I was thinking. No one was there to watch my face soften, tighten, or remain still. Only the forest. Only the wind. Only the water. And an aging man sitting inside a world that no longer had the power to wound him. I exhaled, quiet, steady. And then I smiled. A cold smile. Not bitter, not triumphant, not vengeful. A smile shaped like release. And the acceptance that sometimes even a late apology can return a small piece of peace to the one who lost it. I set the phone aside. My gaze stayed on the purple dark lake. In that stillness, my life rose in small ripples. Last Christmas Eve. Ryan slamming the stack of bills on the table. Pay the rent or leave. The sold sign shaking in the September wind. My new cabin, lavender, taking root. Peter calling to say, I'm proud of you, Dad. The news of the investigation, Amy's apology. None of it hurt. None of it thrilled me. They simply existed like stones that once survived fire. Hot once, but now just shapes. I stood. My knees cracked the sound of age, but not the sound of weakness. I picked up the last pouch of lavender seeds, a darker variety I'd bought at the mountain market, stronger fragrance, hardier in the wind. I dug into the soil by the lake. The dirt was cool, soft, clinging to my fingers. The cold brushed my skin, but somehow my chest warmed, as if each seed I planted wasn't just a plant but a choice, an ending, a new beginning. I lowered each seed carefully, covered them with earth, gentle, patient, as if burying something, not pain, not anger, but the old life. As I stood, my phone vibrated again, another message from Amy, Dad. I should have protected you. I stared at the words, small, simple, but heavier than the year that nearly broke me. I sat back down on the old wooden chair, pressed my lips together for a long moment. I remembered her face the day she saw the sold sign, white, wet-eyed, not angry at me, but angry at herself. I remembered the way she looked at Ryan, no fear, no love, no acceptance. A woman finally awake. I typed a reply. Slow, clear, I never needed you to protect me. I only needed you to see me. Not long after she replied, I see you now. I placed the phone on the table. The wind brushed the lake, forming a single perfect ripple before it disappeared. Beside my chair, the small black box containing the only things I kept from Magnolia Street remained closed. Ellen's photograph. The cleaned educator's medal. My old notebook. The house key I kept only as a relic. And Ellen's letter. I lifted the lid. The letter was still there, paper yellowing, edges curled. I unfolded it and read the last line, the one I could recite by heart. Never let anyone take your dignity from you. I folded it carefully, set my hand over my chest. I didn't let them take it, I whispered. But I let them touch it for too long, Ellen. A soft gust brushed across the lake, her answer, perhaps. The sky darkened. Violet bled into ink. The reflection on the water deepened. I sat there, earth still on my hands, and in the dimming light everything felt simple. I am alive. I am whole. I still have value. And they, the ones who pushed me to the edge, are now facing the cost of their choices. I don't need them to suffer. I don't need them to fall. They already have. Not because of me, but because of themselves. I rose, brushing soil from my palms. The tiny lavender seeds lay beneath the earth, waiting to bloom, waiting to turn the lake's edge purple next summer. I looked out at the gathering dark. A final voice rose inside me. My own voice, older, lower. Last year they screamed at me. Pay the rent or leave. I glanced at my dirt-stained hand, the hand that walked away from Magnolia Street without looking back. I left. I climbed the porch steps as the wind sharpened, cold, slicing, but unable to make me shiver. But they never knew I carried something they would never have peace. I looked once more at the dusk closing over the lake like a curtain falling on a play, and they left behind something they will never escape. I looked up into the deep purple sky, the price of their greed. I stepped into the cabin, closed the door, soft but final. Outside, the wind swept through the forest like a choir of 1,000 leaves singing about freedom. I didn't need light, didn't need music, didn't need to see anyone punished. I only needed peace, a peace with edges, a peace I reclaimed myself. And from tonight on I would live in it fully, quietly, without permission from anyone. The cabin door shut behind me, and the story ended. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of a moment when you stayed quiet just to keep the peace, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from, and what part of this story spoke to your heart. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. And on this channel, no one gets silenced. If you believe dignity is worth fighting for, tap the like button. If you've ever carried pain quietly and walked away stronger, leave a comment. Your strength can help another woman who's listening tonight. And if you want more stories of quiet courage, quiet justice, and quiet revenge, hit subscribe. We release a new story every week, and one day I just might tell yours.